Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today I want to talk about translated fiction, supply and demand, and the impact of commerce on what we read. So I'm someone who doesn't read that many translated books, and I think that's largely down to the kind of books that I read. I'll talk a bit more about that later on in the video. But a couple of things have got me thinking about translated fiction recently. So one of those was the fact that I tried to read War and Peace recently. I made a video about it, which you may have seen, about my failure to finish War and Peace. And one of the things that came up a lot in the comments was people asking me which translation I'd read. So for reference, the translation I tried to read was the Briggs translation, but people were suggesting there were other translations that I might have got on better with. I'm not sure that's true. I think my main problem with War and Peace, I actually quite enjoyed the writing style. My main problem was just the huge size of the book and the fact that it seemed to be getting where it was going very, very slowly. So unless there's a translation that edits down the length significantly, I suspect I'd still have problems with it. And then the other thing that's got me thinking about it is the International Booker Prize long list, I think, or short list. I think it's the long list, has been announced recently. So lots of people have been talking about that. And it got me thinking about how I'd never heard of any of these books or any of these authors. And that got me thinking about how there seems to be very little translated fiction in the in the kind of genres that I really enjoy. So clearly those are crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. So there definitely is translated fiction out there, and if you think about the crime genre in particular, like Scandinavian crime fiction has been huge in the last 10 years or so. So there's definitely stuff out there, but it feels like it's a very small percentage of the overall. So there are, whilst you can get you can get novels clearly translated to English by authors like Joe Nesbø and people like that. They're definitely in the minority. And when I looked at my shelves, I've managed to pick out a few translated books, which I'll show you here. But they're, definitely the vast majority of the stuff I've got is stuff that was originally published in English. So I just plucked off my shelves pretty much at random. The first few things I could find, I've got 2666 by Roberto Bolaño, which I'm assuming was originally published in Spanish. So translated, so published in 2004. This edition was translated, or the copyright for the translation was from 2008. So it took a few years. Oh yeah, originally published in Spain. I've also got Shiva by Junji Ito, which I've talked about on the channel quite recently. So a collection of manga short stories, which is fantastic. I've got a Swedish horror novel, Harbour, by John Ajvide Lindqvist, which I thought was, I've only read one of his books, Let the Right One In, which I thought was excellent. So yeah, looking forward to getting to this one at some point. And then something else Japanese, so Out by Natsuo Kirino, which again is, I have read, which was fantastic. So this was, I wonder how long it took to... So originally came out in 1997 and the English translation came out in 2003. And interestingly in this one, normally when you look inside the book, you can see, you can't see on the cover who translated it. And I do question that slightly. So I think you can with the classics like War and Peace. If there's a new translation that's come out, they may mention on the cover who translated it. But normally you have to turn to the copyright page. And indeed in this book, Out, there isn't even an individual credited with doing the translation. So the copyright for the translation is with Kodansha International Limited. So they don't even name an individual in here, so far as I can see, as to who translated it. So I think translators probably have a bit of a raw deal. Because it feels to me, reflecting back on that comment or comments people have made about me, maybe preferring a different translation of War and Peace, the work that a translator does can really change the feel of the book. And you could have a very literal, technical translation, I guess you'd say, where you are, just translating in the most basic way what the original text said, or clearly you can have a more artistic style of translation where you try and, you know, give the book a feel of its own. And I wonder, you know, as I say, I don't read a huge amount of translated fiction, so I'm really keen to hear from people out there, you know, what your experience of translated fiction is, and how important you feel the role of the translator is in bringing works like out to an English speaking audience, and also, you know, injecting a bit of their own artistry into the book. So anyway, I was thinking about, as I say, how there is not a great deal of translated fiction in the genres I read, with the exception really of Scandinavian crime fiction. And I think you do get kind of breakout authors. So someone like Lindqvist, clearly, I think pretty much all of his books are available in English. So he's one who's done who's made it over. But I'm sure there are many other, you know, European horror authors whose work isn't available in English. And thinking about Junji Ito, it occurs to me that probably where there's the highest volume of translated stuff, so clearly you do get translated stuff in a kind of literary fiction kind of sphere, and I think 2666, you know, whilst it is, I think at its heart, a crime novel, you know, really you would consider to be literary fiction, and I'm sure all the books on that book or long list are literary fiction as well. So aside from that kind of modern literature, and indeed classic literature, where you do get a lot of stuff in translation, I think manga is probably, you know, volume-wise, the area where there's most translated stuff, and where English-speaking people are consuming the most text that was originally not written in English. I've phrased that very badly, but you get what I mean. You know, manga is huge in the West, in the UK and in America, and I'm sure in Europe as well. And I think it presents a slightly different style of comic book storytelling, visual storytelling, than we have been used to in the West, and there's something about it that has, you know, that clearly really appeals to Western audiences. So it's interesting that, you know, it's almost like one exception to it. And what's also interesting is that Western comic book publishers don't really seem to have tried to mimic it. So you don't get, I believe, and feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, it certainly seems to me that there aren't, you know, Western Western versions of the manga style of storytelling. It's very much, you know, stuff that was originally published in Japanese that's been translated, and that may well be because there's just such a huge amount of it out there that it's easy for publishers like Viz, who I think are, you know, one of the really big publishers of manga in the West, to find stuff that they think will be particularly appealing to a Western audience and translate it. And I do wonder why there isn't that for other forms of fiction. So, you know, as I've said, there doesn't seem to me to be a huge amount of horror fiction that's translated into English. You know, you've got people like Lindqvist, and you've also got, to an extent, Japanese horror fiction. So, like Koji Suzuki and people like that. You know, a lot of Koji Suzuki's work has been translated, and there are other Japanese horror writers I could think of whose work's been translated, but I'm sure there's a lot more stuff that's untranslated. So I'm guessing that this is a supply and demand thing. I'm guessing that the publishers in the West find that there is enough, you know, more than enough stuff that was originally published in the, you know, kind of various popular fiction genres that has been written in English, so they don't need to look for authors from other countries, non-English speaking countries, for work to translate to sell over here. So there just isn't that requirement for it. And I was reflecting on the fact that, you know, if you're a Netflix subscriber, and many of us will be, you will have noticed that in the last couple of years, the volume, like the percentage of content on Netflix, particularly TV shows, that is subtitled or dubbed, because it was originally made in originally made in a language other than English, has gone up massively. And the reason for that is not a demand reason, it's a supply reason. It's because during the COVID pandemic, it was much more difficult to make TV programs. So the supply of TV programs during that period or after that period, shrunk massively. But clearly demand actually went up because people were staying at home because they had to. And so what Netflix has started doing is pushing a lot more content from their international markets into into the UK and the US, with either dubbing or subtitles. And something like Squid Game clearly was like the standout success of that. That was an absolutely massive show. So it shows that when you provide content from other countries to English speaking audiences, if you do it in the right way, they want it and they're happy to watch it and can really, really enjoy it. So I do wonder if publishers are missing a bit of a trick by not translating more popular fiction from other from other countries, and maybe they just need to try different styles and see how it takes. And I was interested to learn a while ago through a commenter that there's a style of Japanese novel called a light novel, which is kind of analogous to like a YA novel in a series over here. So these are books where there's often many volumes in the series. They tend to be reasonably short, so kind of 200-page sort of mark, and kind of filled with action and incident and things like that, and fairly easy to read. So not too deep. So really exactly the kind of books that I quite enjoy reading. And I discovered that actually I do have some light novels. So I bought a while ago from Humble Bundle a bundle of Vampire Hunter D novels. I've read the first one and I did really quite enjoy it. And I discovered after, through a conversation with this person in the comments, that is indeed a light novel. So I have read at least one light novel, but I'm sure there are loads more out there that I would really enjoy, because it's that style of kind of mass-produced popular fiction that often really appeals to me. So I'm keen to find more. And I do wonder if there's even... maybe I need to look around a bit, because I wonder sometimes if there will be fan translations and things like that. So I think I'm right in saying that some of the first manga that was available in the West was actually translated by fans. And certainly video games, there were often fan translations of Japanese role-playing video games, because they were, there was a lot of demand for that in the West, but it was a demand that the video game publishers hadn't really realised was there. So back in, I guess, like the 90s and early 2000s, there were people who would translate the text in Japanese RPGs in order to be able to play them. And for their friends and other people to be able to play them. And I love that kind of fan engagement with a piece of entertainment. So I wonder if there are some fan translations of some of these light novels that I could find. So anyway, so all of this thinking got me also thinking about the question of, given that translators are so what's the word I'm looking for? Get so little credit for their translations. Do publishers sometimes change the text of translations after they've published them? And the recent controversy around Puffin, basically rewriting portions of Roald Dahl's books and slightly changing them for a more modern audience, got me thinking about that as well. Because effectively, what you are doing when you translate a foreign work into English, you are localizing it, and that's the term that's used in the video game industry for taking a Japanese video game and turning it into something that can be sold in Western markets. And part of that will be literally just translating the text, but there may be other changes that get made as well, because there are references or whatever in there that Western audiences just wouldn't get. So sometimes some of that stuff gets changed as well during the localization process. So it made me think that effectively what Puffin were trying to do when they, with their edits to Roald Dahl, were localize his work from the version that was the right version for an audience in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, to the version that's the right version for an audience today. So it's a kind of a different kind of localization. But yeah, so it got me wondering if one of the things perhaps that happens with classics where they get retranslated over time it's exactly that, isn't it? It's bringing it up to date and making it more accessible for a modern audience, and that may also mean removing content that would be not difficult to understand for a modern audience, but unacceptable for a modern audience. So, certainly if you think about, and this isn't necessarily about translation, but, some of the language that's used in books like Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain has been changed to make it more acceptable for the audience of the day. And I think that's what Puffin were trying to do with Dahl, and maybe they went a bit further than they needed to. And certainly there has been a lot of controversy about it. But as I say, I wonder if that happens quite often in translations of classic literature, and indeed maybe even in translations of modern literature. So I don't know if a work of popular fiction that has ended up being translated into English in, say, 1990 is the version of that book that you can buy today still exactly the same, or do they ever get tweaked? And I'm not saying they do. I have no idea if they do or not, and if anyone knows, please do let me know. But it's an interesting idea, isn't it? Because I think if they did get tweaked, A, no one would notice, and B, there certainly wouldn't be any controversy about it. Now, maybe that publishers are less inclined to do that kind of tweaking anyway, because the books are designed to be read by adults rather than kids, as they are in the case of Dahl. But it's an interesting question anyway, isn't it? And I do wonder how much goes on behind the curtain of the publishing industry that we just never get to see, and therefore don't know about. And then the other thing I was thinking about in terms of translation is how common is the reverse? And I really don't know. I don't know how common it is for English works to get translated into other languages. Clearly it happens, and clearly authors, like big authors like Stephen King, their work will get translated into, dozens of languages. But I don't know, on a day-to-day basis, if I were to walk into a bookshop in France, say, how many of the books would originally have been written in English. So if you live, in a country where English isn't the dominant language and you're watching this, please do let me know how common is it for English work to be translated, and how big a portion of the shelves of your bookshops does work that was originally published in English and has been translated take up? Is it a really common thing, or is it more like it is over here, kind of the exception where you may get certain kind of niche areas where you do get quite a lot of translated stuff, but by and large the books that you can buy in the bookshops are ones that were originally written in the language of the country you're in. Okay, time for a random book from the shelves. Today's is naturally a work that has been translated from another language. It's In the Miso Soup by Ryu Murakami, which I've been meaning to read for ages and was very kindly sent to me by a subscriber recently. So yeah, looking forward to reading this soon. So I hope you found that interesting. Do let me know in the comments what you think, particularly if you live outside the English-speaking world, and can share your experiences of of work translated from English into other languages. I'm reflecting on the fact that I think in the film industry, America really does dominate, and I think a lot of American films get translated into languages for other countries either via dubbing or subtitles. And can perform very well in the box office in other countries. But is the same true of popular fiction? Do let me know in the comments. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.